Hi.
Hello, everybody. Previous segment was Abraham negotiating with Jehovah, who apparently was walking with him in the story and then left him, seen as a man. And we join the story again as the two of these three men arrive in Sodom. And they are called in this segment angels, but they're also called men. So Genesis chapter 19 verses 1 to 13.
Now the two angels arrived at Sodom by evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot caught sight of them, then he got up to meet them, and bowed down with his face to the earth. And he proceeded to say, "Please now, my lords, turn aside, please, into the house of your servant, and stay overnight, and have your feet washed. Then you must get up early and travel on your way." To this they said, "No, but in the public square is where we shall stay overnight." But he was very insistent with them, so that they turned aside to him, and came into his house. Then he made a feast for them, and he baked unfermented cakes, and they went to eating. Before they could lie down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, from boy to old man, all the people in one mob. And they kept calling out to Lot, and saying to him, "Where are the men who came in to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may have intercourse with them." Finally, Lot went out to them, to the entrance, but he shut the door behind him. Then he said, "Please, my brothers, do not act badly. Please, here I have 2 daughters who have never had intercourse with a man. Please let me bring them out to you. Then do to them as is good in your eyes. Only to these men do not do a thing, because that is why they have come under the shadow of my roof." At this they said, "Stand back there." And they added, "This lone man came here to reside as an alien, and yet he would actually play the judge. Now we are going to do worse to you than to them." And they came pressing heavily in on the man, on Lot, and were getting near to break in the door. So the men thrust out their hands and brought Lot into them, into the house, and they shut the door. But they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, from the least to the greatest, so that they were wearing themselves out trying to find the entrance. Then the men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, son-in-law, and or sons and your daughters, and all who are yours in the city, bring out of the place? For we are bringing this place to ruin, because the outcry against them has grown loud before Jehovah, so that Jehovah sent us to bring the city to ruin."
These beings called men, seen as men by the people of the city, obviously have supernatural attributes. So yes, they are at least angels, and they have enormous power because they're going to destroy the city. But notice there's a change. Whereas in the previous chapter, the third man talks as Jehovah and is addressed as Jehovah, these 2 men are called angels. And they speak in the third person about the third man of the prior story. The outcry, the NIV says, the outcry to the Lord, Jehovah, against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So the conversation now has moved from the first person, Jehovah speaking and being addressed as Jehovah, to the third. It's Jehovah that's going to destroy the city, but he's going to do it through these angels. So it's worth looking at verse 14 as well, because it says there that these men then said to him, "Hurry and get out of this place, because Jehovah is about to destroy the city." So Jehovah is destroying the city, but he's using 2 angels to destroy the city. The story gets complicated if you're not paying attention to the details. you kind of get lost in the transitions.
So I think for a witness, the question is, if Jehovah is on the earth, is heaven empty?
Yeah.
You know, so we were going to read 24 as well.
If you would.
Okay. Then Jehovah made it rain sulfur and fire from Jehovah, from the heavens, upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah. So now you've got them on the earth and in heaven.
Yeah, this is a very unusual construction. And when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I looked at that and I thought, gee, I hope no Christian brings this up, because it's really weird to say Jehovah rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from Jehovah, out of the heavens. It's as if the editor, or Moses, presumably the original writer, has taken care here to make sure that reading the prior stories of Jehovah appearing on earth, you might be coming to the conclusion that your God Jehovah is like the pagan gods, who is localized.
Yeah. Right.
But this one says, well, if God can appear on earth, he's not in heaven. Not double. That wasn't a verbal slip. That means that him appearing or actually being in a certain place on earth does not mean he's not somewhere else.
Yeah. So he's able to do what the angels did, take on a human body, and he's also in heaven. He's not shut out of his own creation. It's possible for him to be all places.
Yeah. Well, and when you think of the strangeness of the belief you had when you were a Jehovah's Witness, that God gives angels the ability to do something that he himself cannot do.
Yeah, or won't do. Yeah.
And your backup for that idea, of course, is a text like John 1:18, where we mentioned in the previous one, it doesn't say God can't appear or can't be a man. It says he has not been seen.
Yeah.
And if you read around it, in John 1:18, for instance, the extended sentence says, but the only begotten God, who we've already been told in John 1, is the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. New World Translation, a God. They're the only ones who translate that way, except for Johannes Graeber. But John 1:14 says the Logos took on flesh, tabernacled in flesh. And then we're told that it is true that God in his essence cannot be seen, has not been, not cannot, let me correct myself, not cannot be seen, but has not been seen in his essence. But on the other hand, the only begotten God, the New World Translation says, is the one who has explained him. So even in the sentence that we hang all that weight on, if we're Jehovah's Witnesses, you see there's a problem. That the sight that's being discussed in John 1:18 is obviously not physical sight. Primarily, it's something to do with explanation. So it's something to do with spiritual sight. We've got it backwards if we're Jehovah's Witnesses.
And we try to make everything very, very clean, very clear cut. And yet these kinds of texts show you it's not. And why should we expect it should be clear cut? We're talking about the Creator. Why do we try and make the Creator have limits like humans have limits? He's the Creator. He's God.
We once taught, Joe Rutherford taught anyway, that God was located somewhere in our universe. I believe it was the constellation of Pleiades he lived on. But now the Watchtowers effectively shoved God out of his own universe and said, no, he effectively can't appear in it. Well, it's a very dangerous thing, and I would say it's blasphemous to tell God that he can't do what his creatures can do.
You are localizing God just as much by saying he can only be in the heavens and shutting him out of his own creation. That's still localizing God.
In future videos, we want to make at least 3 videos showing how Hebrew thinkers, principally David, Solomon, his son, and Jeremiah, dealt with this seeming paradox of God is here, but he's also there. How did they reason on what the Christian church has always called God's omnipresence. Because this is not a New Testament idea, and it's not made up by the church. It's present even here, intimated anyway, if not actually laid out in propositional form. God is, we saw in the previous chapter, omniscient. He knows everything. He's omnipotent, that is, he can do anything. Is anything impossible for Jehovah? And here it's very strongly suggested that he's also omnipresent. There's no place where he isn't. So we wanted to deal with David, Solomon, and Jeremiah and how they think about these seeming paradoxes. But also we wanted to go back, now that we've got to this point in Genesis, back to the beginning to fill in.
With a little more detail. Because especially with the doctrine of grace, which is strong in the book of Genesis and not strong with the witnesses.
Yeah, is the book of Genesis, the whole Bible really, but you can do it just with Genesis. Is the book of Genesis about men who were faithful, who were rewarded by Jehovah? Or is it that men who were unfaithful were objects of Jehovah's grace? And the greatest of all God's attributes, I would suggest, is love, but love is expressed in grace in the Old Testament and the New. As Ephesians very plainly says, salvation is of grace through faith. It's not of ourselves, so that none of us can boast. So we'll go back to the beginning of Genesis and fill in a few of the gaps.
Right.